discrimination.
Tired of the second class frustration.
Tired of religion for generations.
Tired of being sick and tired.
Tired of the suffering and neglect. Tired of centuries of disrespect.
Gotta take your knee off my neck.
Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Oh,
Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
sick and tired.
Being sick and tired. No more mothers crying, no more others dying. Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
We just can't go on this way. We've got to break these chains. Now's the time to make a change. Together we can celebrate new day.
And tomorrow.
Say the name.
Orlando, Freddie, Eric, and
Say
Jamal.
the name.
Sandy, George, and Rihanna.
Say it.
Make me wanna scream and holler.
Sick and
Sick and tired. So sick and tired. No more mothers crying, no more others dying. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. No more mothers crying, no more others dying. Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
We can't
No more mothers
breathe.
crying, no more others dying. Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
We can't breathe.
Being sick and tired.
No justice, no peace.
Being sick and tired.
I'm so tired.
Being sick and tired.
No justice, no peace.
Being sick and tired.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. We open with the music of our dear friend and community leader, Gary Hines, and the Sounds of Blackness. We used that song often as the theme of the program because it captures the spirit of our people and of our times. I think that we've all heard this saying by Fannie Lou Hamer, sick and tired of being sick and tired. The song comes from that, but that really is like a, what do you call it? I can't think of it. I use the word catechism. It's a shortcut. It's a way of us communicating a lot with just a few words, sick and tired of being sick and tired. And why that song is important right now, why it comes to mind, is because I watched a show, a news report last night on KSTP television by investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen. And the headline on the story, and I'm going to be paraphrasing some of the story that's on the KSTP website. The headline of the story was "Banking While Black. Police video shows how cashing a paycheck led to handcuffs." And before I go into that story in particular, it just brought to mind personal and family memories. My wife, Bobby, and I wrote and published a piece some years ago that we called, I think the title of the story was, well, the key to the story was looking for a friendly face. And it reflected our experiences shopping in downtown Minneapolis and always having to have the extra duty of scanning and assessing who we would go to check out or to make the purchases we intended to purchase. And the reason we had to do that is that even though we're the customers, even though we're spending the money, even though our patronage is paying the salary of the person who is serving us, our experience is, and we've heard this from other people in our families and across the country, the Black experience is that too often the service we receive has been service tinged with a contempt, a condescension, an arrogance, a cultural chauvinism, and out hatred. and dislike. And the weird part is this, you're spending your hard-earned money to support, and in doing so, you're supporting a business's sales and financial goals. But then, in addition to spending your money, not only do you get what you pay for, but you also get insulted. You get humiliated. You get uh, treated as though someone is doing you a favor, getting rich on your decision to patronize them. And that, my friends, is something that I think qualifies for that notion of the song, Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. And so the experiences we had rose to the occasion that we, Bobby Ford, my wife, Bobby Ford McFarlane, and I put pen to paper and wrote a piece. I'll find it and publish it again several years ago, but it explained the distaste we have and the anger we experience at being treated rudely by people, cashiers, checkers, bankers, service people who operate out of some frame of reference other than the proper frame for a service provider. Yeah, I often recall that when I grew up in Kansas City, my parents owned a grocery store. I kind of got into business because I was raised in business. And we had the sign, and the store we owned on 28th in Brooklyn, my mom and dad bought from a Jewish gentleman who'd been there for years and years and years. And my mom worked for him for a number of years. And then when he was going to retire, he offered, and we bought. So we owned the grocery store for a number of years. But he had a sign on the door, and the sign was, "The customer is always right." And it was a principle. Of course, customers aren't always right, but there's a principle. That's another saying. What's the right word for it? It's a proverb in a sense. It's a shorthand that guides you so that what you do is girded by, fueled by, informed by a standard. And the standard ought to be the customer is right, and that you ought to appreciate the patronage that the customer is bringing. But in the case of the story that I'm going to talk to you about, this gentleman who was a young guy and this story is personal for us too. I don't know him, haven't met him, intend to reach out to him, is a Mississippian, young brother from Mississippi. And it means a lot to both my wife and I because on my mother's side, Mississippi is where we're from. My wife's side, she's from Mississippi. So we are particular about upholding this idea of Mississippians as hardworking, honest people, the salt of the earth, and not accepting the constant denigration of people from the South, of people from Mississippi, of Black people. So my colleague and friend, Brother Tyrone Terrell, has joined me. Tyrone, I'm just sort of getting background on this and personalizing this story. I want to talk about the story written by Eric Rasmussen, actually produced by and written and presented by Eric Rasmussen on KSTP TV. It was presented last night, and you were one of the sources in the story. Compliments to you for bringing your wealth of knowledge and expertise about the question of human rights, of civil rights, of effective business policy and practice, and whether this was an incident of a failure of an individual or a failure of an institution to ensure that all of its people were properly trained, oriented, and that they consistently and in a way that was measurable and manageable delivered quality, respectful service to all of their customers. So, Tyrone, how you doing, first of all, brother? I'm not hearing you. I see you, but I don't hear you. And I think we had this problem before, so it'll take a second or so to figure that out. And just jump in when you get the audio stream working. And AZ, you can probably work behind the scenes with Tyrone to make sure he's got the right. But let me give you the story that I'm talking about. So there's a guy, I'm paraphrasing, named Joe Morrow, who worked at a grocery distributor in Hopkins. I think that's the company that supplies and his owner company for Cub Foods, Super Value, that organization, a big company, a good company in our Twin Cities. And this guy had a good job. And so this guy, Joe Morrow, according to this report, the report by Eric Rasmussen that was on KSTP, and I'm actually sort of looking at the story that is online at the KSTP website. So I want to give credit to Eric Rasmussen and KSTP for quoting from and pulling from their story for this report. And so Eric wrote that despite having an account with the bank and showing the ID, somehow the encounter at the bank led to a call to police and threats of arrest, and actually led to Morrow being placed in handcuffs. And Rasmussen reported that a bank manager told the police officers that he suspected the check that was being presented by Morrow was a fake. And apparently he called the employer to verify the document, the check, but he did so only after the 23-year-old young black man was removed from his office. Well, of course, what we know is that the check was real. And, the other issue is that this guy actually had an account at the bank. So this is the first bank where this occurred. Let me say this as a matter of disclosure. You know that I own Insight News, my company, McFarlane Media, Insight News. And First Bank is a customer of ours. It's a valued customer. They run advertising in my newspaper, and my company also banks with First Bank. So I want to be transparent and disclose that. I disclose that I've got in my view, a good relationship with the bank and a good history with the bank. And in fact, the bank was one of the very first advertisers to launch Insight back in 1974, when I launched Insight as a magazine. And the bank had a branch location in North Minneapolis called First Plymouth National Bank, headed by a black man, a mentor of mine, Mr. John Warder. So I'm putting that out in the public because my relationship with the bank is ongoing, exists today, they're customers today, and I appreciate their business. That said, none of us, they nor we, should or can accept inappropriate behavior by any of our employees, associates, and we owe it to ourselves and to the community and to history to be correct, to do correctly. And so for that reason, I believe this is a story worth telling, and why I'm having this conversation right now. So we're still waiting for Tyrone Terrell to jump in. I'll just give you more of the paraphrase of the story. The story is based on an article that I'm looking at online from KSTP, article and story by investigative reporter Eric Rasmussen, a good report, a good story. And again, the story made me pull up Gary Hines's article to open our music, to open the program up, the music, Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. And I think that this experience is one that Black people are sick and tired of going into stores, going into businesses, going anywhere, and being questioned, challenged by people that ought to be applauding our entry. They ought to be, welcoming us with a great fanfare and with appreciation and gratitude. But instead, somehow, the culture has allowed them and created in them a spirit of animosity, of antagonism. And I have to say, it's a spirit that's based on what I perceive to be a racializing of power, and their fear of losing power, their fear that Black people or people of color may be taking power, and if and as we do, it means a loss for them. And I'm sorry for that short-sighted thinking that exists, but we have to call it out and talk about it. So they had this brother removed from the office of the manager. And the brother, to his credit, was saying, I think you all are profiling me. This is a racial profile. You're doing this because I'm black. And of course, they denied it and didn't want to say it. They said, oh, we've had other people cashing checks that were bogus from this company, and we wanted to make sure. And so when he, in his report, was talking to Eric Rasmussen, he was saying that he felt like they treated him like he was a criminal, that he was paraded out of the office, that he was humiliated having to walk in cuffs out of the bank manager's office out to the car outside somewhere, and just the indignity that he suffered from that was unbearable. Well, the thing is, this is all being public now because of a 45-minute video from the body cam worn by two officers who responded to the call. They got a call for a possible fraudulent check. So let's think about that. Let's think about that. Let's think about when the last big call was for a fraudulent, or in this case, counterfeit currency, a bill. I mean, put them together. And so in the one case, possibility of a counterfeit bill being passed at a neighborhood store, and a person detained, arrested, in this case by rogue acting cops, resulting in the death of that individual and the burning of our city. Think about it. So here, another call, a manager saying, oh, possible fraudulent check. And a suspect who was refusing to leave because he wanted his deposit, his check, deposited into his account. He's a customer at the store. So think about the connection, and think about it this way. This, you could say, oh, just one manager exercising due diligence, trying to protect his bank and the bank's assets and his overall business, and being wary or attentive to maybe some past fraud or potential for fraud. And you can rationalize the bank actions if you want to. I choose not to, and I believe we should not. We should look to policy and practice. What is the policy? What is the practice? So I see Tyrone is trying to get on. He's in, but not able to get the audio in, and we're working on that. So you know what? More on the story. So, the young man, to his credit, reported to the manager of the bank that he felt this was a racial incident and that he, in fact, would report it. And when the officers came, their attitude was, can you just please calm down and don't say anything, I'm quoting here, don't say anything stupid that you're going to get arrested for saying. So he was kind of, on the one hand, you could see the arresting officer, the responding officer, attempt to de-escalate the situation and advise the young man to just cool out, chill out. But the question is why? He's the customer. And anyway, so I'm interested. I'm curious. I can read more from this. One of the people that responded to this story was, again, my colleague and my friend, Tyrone Terrell. And AZ, are we having any success in getting Tyrone connected? I'd love to have his take on what we said so far, what we shared so far. Another person that was covered in the story was Dr. Samuel Myers, who's an economist who leads the Roy Wilkins Institute at the Hubert Humphrey Public Policy Center at the University of Minnesota. And Dr. Myers had, I think a dozen years ago, talked about the hostility and inequity in the banking industry towards the Black community in general and Black individuals. And he questioned the language, the conversation, the dialogue between the banker and even the officers and the young man the customer, the person who was attempting to deposit his check into the bank, supporting the bank, supporting the economy, a working young man, 23 years old, worker depositing his check, and who was met with um, what we call, a microaggression, micro in that it involves one person. But the point is, we see this happening around the country all the time. So I'm wondering, if you're listening on YouTube or Facebook and have a comment that you want to bring into this, please post it in Facebook or post it in YouTube. We'll try to monitor both and see if we can get your comments into the conversation as well. Dr. Myers said that this was incredible, inappropriate, and that this experience happens again and again and again with Black people all over the country, between Blacks and whites. And the question is, at what point in time will the institutions that employ and pay wages to these individuals, and the question is, will they intercede and instruct them on proper care of customers and proper service to Black people? Tyrone, you're here now. Tyrone, how you doing, man?
I'm good, brother. Can you hear me?
I hear you perfectly. Thank you for joining, and thank you for fixing the sound problem. But jump in. I'm just amazed at what happened. I opened the program with Gary Hines' Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired, because this is a case that everybody Black that I know can testify to, has experienced personally, or somebody he or she knows who's gone into a grocery store, a clothing store, a drugstore, department store, somewhere, and received treatment that was inappropriate, unfair, and it was based on a racialized sense of power. The sense of power is one where, if we're spending or bringing our money, buying things, maybe we're buying high ticket items or making a big deposit, the cashier or the service person somehow feels like we shouldn't be operating in that arena. You shouldn't be driving a nice car. You shouldn't be living in this neighborhood, paying this mortgage. You shouldn't be, depositing this amount of money in our bank. Who are you? Because my picture of you is a picture of a less than full human being. And so when you show up, as a ordinary human being expecting ordinary service, somehow I have to question your authenticity. Are you really real, or are you a crook? And this brother was saying they made him feel like he was a criminal because they handcuffed him in the manager's office and walked him out into another office in front of a lot of people. He was humiliated. So what about that? What's this story mean to you, Tyrone Terrell?
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me. It was blatant racism, Al. There was no reason for a U.S. bank to treat that young man in the manner that they did. One, he had an account there. He deposited the same check there before. And to treat him in that manner was ridiculous. And I hope he got a great settlement, but it goes beyond a settlement for
the one individual.
Right. Because the bank manager, I'm sure, was not disciplined. U.S. Bank feels they've gotten off on it. I will be reaching out to U.S. Bank's officials for a meeting with them, because it's not right. That young man could have been hurt or even killed.
Well,
and the conduct of the Columbia Heights Police Department was terrible. The way they talked to him, and he wasn't aggressive. I hate the word compliant, but that's really for animals, but he was compliant. But to handcuff him, humiliate him in front of a bank full of people who will never know the outcome, right? They will tell other folks a Black man came into the bank with a fraudulent check,
mm-hmm.
and the bank caught him. And most checks today, they run it through the bank before they even give you your money. They verify the funds. They do all that before they even give you their money. There's no more that 3, 4, 5 day wait business. They can know within seconds if that check is good or bad. But again, this man had an account. He didn't walk off the street saying, "Cash my check." He has an account with that bank. And it was clearly because he was a black male and a young black male that they disrespected him in the manner that they did.
So what do we do about that? You know, I would be glad to work with you in reaching out to the leadership at the bank. I think it's worth that kind of a conversation. Tyrone, I don't know if you heard it before, but I opened up by disclosing that I have a relationship with the bank. The bank is an advertiser in my newspaper. They've been an advertiser with Insight News. And actually, you knew our friend, John Warder,
Yes.
who was the president of First Plymouth National Bank. He was actually the very first advertiser in our publication when I launched Insight back in 1974. So we go back a long ways. Having disclosed that, I continue to say, and I say it now, we still cannot accept aberrant, rogue, racist behavior, even from places that are attempting to champion improving the culture, the community, to eliminate race and racism. But here it shows up inside the house. And I think we have an obligation, and they have an obligation, and you and I have an obligation to call it out and talk about it and to support this young man and others so situated, because this story is not unique. I said that Black people everywhere can tell you stories about being disrespected and actually abused in some cases as
That's
they
right.
were attempting to bring their money into an establishment that helps that establishment become profitable, that helps those employees pay their bills and raise their families. But we have to bear humiliation for bringing our business to that business. I think it's unacceptable, and I think we have to talk about it. What do you think?
Al, I agree totally. And so, however you think we should proceed, I'll do that. Invite other community partners to go with us, but to have a real conversation with U.S. Bank about the treatment of this young man and other Black people who bank with them. Our community deserves better from them. And so, no, we can definitely offline talk and come up with a strategy to do just that and do it soon. I was restricted from doing anything because I did the interview about 2-3 weeks ago.
Okay.
But waiting for them to put their whole story together and then run it. But now that they've ran their story, we need to have a conversation with U.S. Bank.
I think it was a good story.
Yes.
I think Eric Rasmussen, I don't know him personally, but I think he did a very good job in bringing a variety of voices, yours included, and that of Dr. Sam Myers, and did the journalistic effort to try to reach all the parties involved. And I think it was a fair story and a balanced story. One of the things that stories like this do, however, is sometimes the society wants to isolate and say this is a particular specific one-of-a-kind incident. And until we can show up saying, no, this is not one of a kind. This is part of the practice. It's a pattern and practice.
That's
and it
right.
reflects a policy. And you mentioned this, and I did too, Tyrone, when you were getting on. So this is a case of a guy walking into a bank, to a business with a check. But we're all now around the world aware of a guy walking into a business with a currency. And in that case, like this case, accused of the possibility of fraudulent activity.
Yes.
And whether there was fraudulent activity or not in the first case, the consequence of the response of the business is something that the whole world is reckoning with now.
Yes.
The murder of George Floyd uh, uh, over a policy in a business that it seems to me questioned and took to an unreasonable level, right? Uh, a the governing of black customers,
Hmm.
and there had to have been other things that could have happened in George Floyd's case that didn't happen. But what did happen was that we lost a brother. He lost a life, and now the world is kind of dealing with the consequences of the revelation of the depth and breadth of systemic racialized activity against black people, anti-blackness. This could have been the same thing, and it's close to the same thing. Fortunately, it didn't lead to that, but I say that encounter at a retail establishment and this encounter at a retail establishment are almost one and the same. What do you think?
Al, I agree totally. I mean, if that young man had made the wrong move that day, he could have easily been shot, easily. And there's no doubt in my mind that, and I thought about George Floyd uh, when Eric and I sat down at the Holly Q. Brown Community Center and we watched the video. Um, and, but I've known Sam Myers for many, many years. I have never seen Sam that irate.
Yeah.
I have never seen Sam that upset. And that's how deep it cut with him in terms of to see another black man to be disrespected and humiliated like that. Now, everybody knows that Super Value has been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know they changed names.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that they have a new name for the company. But once they run that check through their system, they would have seen the check was valid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all they had to do. But no, they were too busy and humiliating, calling the police like that quick.
Mm-hmm.
Over $900, not $9,000, not $90,000, not 190, 900. And to humiliate that young man and to humiliate our community, because it's not just him. As you said, brother, it impacts all of us because we've all received that treatment at one time or another.
Yes.
And
we all know that we can receive it today or tomorrow or the next day.
That's exactly right.
The article
any day.
Mm-hmm. The article I wrote, I mentioned this earlier too. Bobby and I wrote a story, and I can't remember the exact title of it, but the catch line was "Looking for a Friendly Face," and it means that we go into a retail establishment, and before we go check out, we have to have an internal rating system. Should I go to checker A or checker B or checker C? Because more than likely, what I want to do is avoid the hassle and humiliation of someone doubting my being here as a customer.
That's right.
And treating me rude. I don't want to be treated rudely. I'm spending my money, and I don't want to come here and then get spit on, in effect, as I pay this person's salary. And I've had that happen to me at Costco and different stores where you go in, you ask people to follow the policy. Costco has a policy on their wall about customer service and return policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I go there and stand, and I see white people bring things back all day and all night, and the checking personnel will smile, no problem, no question, no problem, and I'm fifth in line, and I get there with my return item, and all of a sudden there's a problem, and there's a look, you've brought too many things back here before. And so I said, wait a minute, you got a policy on the wall, dissatisfied for any reason at any time, bring it back, get your money back. I have nothing else to say to you. Follow the policy.
Right.
But they began the approach to me with a sense and a spirit of intimidation, which Tyrone I rejected and, do reject. So how do we deal with that as individuals and as a community? I think this is a teachable moment, and we have to encourage all of our people to not accept when you feel something is not right, do what this brother did. Insist. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to do is meet with U.S. Bank, and then if we are not satisfied with what we hear from U.S. Bank in terms of how they're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again,
Mm-hmm.
is inform our community that U.S. Bank is not a place for us.
How can they do that? What can they do to ensure that it doesn't happen again? I mean, it's almost like somebody. So we know the leadership at the bank. You know, both you and I have friends there, and we know the leadership is doing a lot of good stuff and is articulating a policy and in the community supporting things, but still inside the chain of command, there are places where the unacceptable is going on and nobody is checking it, stopping it, monitoring it because it happened. So how do we get to that point of accountability?
Well, one thing I tell people all the time, and I just did a national conference yesterday, and actually a panel with Attorney General Ellison, Booker Hodges, and Spike for the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies, and talking about George Floyd's case, the impact of that on Minneapolis. But what you're talking about, Al, how do we can't prevent it from happening, but we can lessen it a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
And too often I tell people all the time, the most dangerous people in any company is the HR people. They're the ones who make you in a qualified pile, unqualified, just based on your name, where you're from, what you have on your resume. But nobody ever checks on those individuals. Most human rights complaints come from that first line supervisor or that first line teller in a bank who did exactly what happened to the young man. And the banks, the businesses don't do enough check and balance of these folks. These folks carry all the power. The president and owner, the Polad family, they just want your business. They don't want anybody being discriminated against. They don't even want anybody treated bad. They simply want you to be a good customer. And in being a good customer, we have a right to be treated right. And that's what's not happening. And so I get leery when people talk about diversity or inclusion. What's this new thing they got? DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DIE, whatever they call it. Bottom line, are you treating people right? I don't care what name you call it. And treat people the same way you treat white customers. If they would just adopt that policy, treat everybody the same way. If I was white, walking in that store, give me the same treatment.
That
So
reminds me of the famous Eddie Murphy skit on Saturday Night Live. You remember that one? Eddie Murphy did a skit where somebody came in, wanted to borrow some money, and it was a black, lending officer, and looked at the person's criteria and said, I'm sorry, because of this, the other, you can't get a loan. It was a white customer.
Mm-hmm.
And then the white customer asked to speak to somebody else, a white officer in the bank. And that guy said, "Oh, no problem. What do you need?
Right.
How much you need?" Right. And so that's how I see my experiences at Costco. When, white people come in and are smilingly, embraced and appreciated and valued. And what else can we do for you? But then when I come in looking for the same level of service, there is a resistance, and there is a problem in going the extra mile for me. And Tyrone, it burns me up. It makes me mad.
And it should. And the dangerous part with that, Al, if they do it to their own young brother or young sister, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they do decide to respond to the racism, and not just that particular one time, but when you stack it up numerous times, it makes you want to explode. Now I'm involved in a legal matter that probably could even put my life at risk behind the racist treatment of an employee. And you touched on it. they wouldn't treat a white employee that way and a white customer that way.
Hmm.
But they're doing it's basically prejudice, prejudging somebody based on race.
Hmm.
But we got to hold the Costco's and any other store, the U.S. Bank and any other store, got to be held accountable. We cannot let them get away with it. We cannot.
We used to, I think, I'm not sure if the state human rights department, when you were the city of human rights, right? St. Paul,
Oh, state first.
state then city.
Yep. Then city of Minneapolis after that. Me and George Caldwell, remember?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Right.
Well, they used to do test
The
cases.
on-site compliance reviews, that's gone. Al, that's gone.
So what happened to that, and why couldn't that be done again, where people do tests to see, because they did that for housing in particular, to see if housing discrimination existed in certain places and transactions.
I just spoke yesterday, as I said, to about 200 civil rights organizations that they've got to take their rightful place once again, being at the forefront of these issues. There is no compliance mechanism anymore. They don't audit companies. They don't make sure companies are doing everything they say they're going to do with their hiring practices. They're not checking the terminations and layoffs of employees. So it's not being done. The days of OFCCP and the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, St. Paul Department of Human Rights, and Minneapolis Civil Rights Department being real enforcement agencies, they're not doing it. They don't even come out of the building. We talked yesterday about the whole George Floyd. You didn't see one human rights official from an agency say one word. Not one.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Not one. Not from the state, not from the city of Minneapolis, city of St. Paul. None of them said a word. And they should have been at the forefront of this. They should have been standing right next to the mayor, the governor, whoever. They should have been standing right there.
So what is that? What's that say? I mean, what is it? Why is it that way? And what do we do about it?
One, they don't train anymore like they should. It's a skill that most people don't have. It's a mathematical skill, whether it's a chi-square analysis, whether it's a adverse impact analysis. There's a numerical component to it, and so folks don't have it. The days of when we would do joint reviews with OFCCP, State Department of Human Rights. We don't do it. So there's no enforcement, Al. And so it's like saying you can drive them down the street 100 miles an hour and nobody's going to stop you. So it's kind of the same thing with these businesses. There's no check and balance. They're getting government funding. They're discriminating. And they know nothing's going to be done. And so the Costco's and the U.S. banks and those employees who bring their own personal bias to the bank, they made a personal decision, not a U.S. bank decision. Now, U.S. bank paid the price, but that employee should not work for U.S. bank. If I'm the manager of that bank, you're done.
Okay,
you're done.
And you make an example.
I tell people all the time, when I was with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, we used to get 40 or 50 complaints a year against IBM. They got a new CEO, put out a one-page letter saying, if you terminate or discriminate against anybody in my company, I don't care what job you hold here, you're terminated. Brother, complaints disappeared. None.
Okay.
None. Because he sent a clear message. I don't care who you are in this company. If you discriminate, you won't have a job.
And so U.S. Bank can do some things to make its policy and its priorities clear, because what I have read into the reporting that I've seen is that there is a sense of, interpretation. Is the young man who was handcuffed interpreting the situation improperly? Shouldn't he be able to understand the company's position if the company feels like they've experienced several people passing fraudulent documents, and then he walks in the door with his bona fide, legitimate payroll check to deposit in his account? He's a customer, but he's treated with skepticism because of what they perceive and say has been an experience with 4 or 5 or some number of other people who have run scams. But that's not his problem.
That there you go, Al. That is not his problem.
He's a customer doing business the right way. And so how does that message get to the manager that he can't say based on the action of one, discriminate against the all? That's what they're doing. They're saying they're using this example of 1 or 5, saying now I got to check everybody black,
There you go.
or question everybody black. And then we create this cultural perception that, again, devalues, dehumanizes every black customer. And you do that at the same time, your top leadership is really hitting the ground saying we got to respond properly to George Floyd and to the consequences and the challenges of disparities that are being revealed by both George Floyd and the pandemic.
Exactly.
We got to put it all together. And so I'm concerned, what should we be expecting of our state human rights department, of our city human rights department, and our St. Paul and Minneapolis city human rights departments in this arena, and others as well? What kind of voicing are we missing that we ought to be having?
I expect nothing from them. I've come to terms with the poor investigations, cases taking 2 and 3 years. There is no 2 and 3 year human rights case. They don't exist. You can make it last that long.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to one of the national human rights directors yesterday. When I left in 2008 from St. Paul Human Rights, EEOC was paying us $500 a case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's based on a 20-hour investigation per case at about $25 an hour.
Okay.
They now finally, 11 years later, 13 years later, bumped it up to $850 a case. But they're simply saying now you got about 32 hours to put on a case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's max. That's not some cases close just by. I had a woman one time told me she wanted a refund of $27 from the company. That's all she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
That case, I said, in fact, I'll give you $27. Well, no, I'm just saying, there's some cases that close themselves. And then there's other cases that really take investigative time.
Mm-hmm.
But the older a case gets, no case should go beyond 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that point in time, as a business, you're going to litigate that. You're not going to pay 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years of back pay. Okay. And so it ends up being a problem, whereas if you do a good, solid investigation right away, you have a good chance of getting that case resolved, probably even getting the individual job back if the company says they felt they were wrong. But they're not going to wait 6 months, a year, or 3 years later. I don't know if you remember the old I-10 report many years ago where they showed a woman going to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. She was pregnant. They then showed her baby riding his bike. He was 12 years old.
Case still under investigation?
Case. It led to, remember, Lyndon Johnson, at that time, the Commissioner of Human Rights, being terminated.
Yeah.
That they were on a trip to San Francisco for a conference. They were never at the conference. They were golfing, doing, and that led into the investigation of the time frame of cases. And actually got put in the statute that if the case was going to go beyond 12 months, you had to write the respondent and the complainant and tell them why.
Mm-hmm.
So we just need a better job being done by our human rights agencies. And right now, they're not doing that.
I'm looking at the notes of Sam Meyer's comments, and he was talking particularly here in this one part I'm reading about the police body cam. It said 5 investigates showed the body cam video to Sam Myers Jr., a professor at the University of Minnesota, who had researched racial disparities in banking for more than 30 years. And Sam Myers said, quote, "This is a classic example of where things have escalated beyond what they needed to escalate to. I wish I could say that was an aberration. I wish I could say this was an outlier, but this happens a lot." and it says that he authored a report called Responsible Banking in the Twin Cities in 2015 that did look at discriminatory lending practices in Twin Cities. And this report gave failing grades to many of the largest financial institutions for their performance in areas such as customer service provided to minorities. And so here we go. This is not new. It's been going on and on again, on and on. And, you know, the one thing we have learned is the impact of social media. George Floyd is what it is because of the cameras, right? And people being able to document that. We're in the beginning of a case right now in Hennepin County for the murder of Dante Wright,
Yes.
right? And it's camera footage that is making these cases and these incidences more accessible to more people, because as in Georgia, institutions are covering up wrongdoing and hiding it and hoping it goes away. But the lesson right now is that all of us need to be prepared and willing to document what our experiences are and share them, and in doing so hold each other and institutions accountable. What do you think, Tyrone Terrell?
I agree totally. Dr. Myers was right on point. That it's been clearly documented, the treatment that we receive, and we're not a valued customer. We don't get the same respect, and that's why I was saying even yesterday again to the human rights folks, policing gets the most publicity, but libraries do it, park and recs do it, public works. I've got 6, 7 brothers right now I'm dealing with that are being treated badly in the public works department of the city of St. Paul. And almost plantation treatment. And so the police department get the most notoriety, if you want to call it that, because they're taking somebody's life.
But it's happening everywhere.
It's happening everywhere. And we have to work with U.S. Bank to fix this. Same thing when Costco does it, okay? Because otherwise, we're going to have some young brother, some young sister who's not going to be as mature as Al McFarlane and decide to act up in the store. They don't want to take it anymore. You know, what did Thang Lou Hamer say? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah, we're going to close on that song in just a minute. AZ, you can get that ready to play again.
Yes. And you know, my good friend Gary Hines, that song. I mean, that says it all. But brother, people are sick and tired, and we cannot stand by. We have to be the voice for the voiceless, right? So we have a responsibility as community leaders, community representatives, whatever you want to call it, to go and talk to the bank and the bank officials, and actually have a meeting at that bank with that bank manager, that bank employee.
And they're going to say that a settlement has been reached, and the settlement includes that nobody can discuss the particulars. How do you respond to that?
We don't want to talk about the settlement.
Particulars of the settlement, right?
That's your business. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to do anything that's going to impact the settlement. What we want to do is talk about the settlement going forward. We want to talk about how you're going to treat our people when they come to your bank. Are you saying you don't want our people to come here? And I know they are a client of yours, so that's income and revenue for Inside News. And
I'm a client of theirs. I mean, because I spend money with them.
And you spend money with them.
Yeah, and so
you have the best platform to ask for that conversation because you're in business with them, you're in business with the community, and you don't want to lose business, and they shouldn't want to lose your business,
right?
But we still got to feel good. I mean, I call it the Rosa Parks test for all of us. Some people sit on the seat, and some people give it up.
My business exists because of the community.
Yeah.
No community, no Inside News. And Inside News, Black Press of America, created because the the racist social structure of our country, with intent and ferocity, devalued Black life. Black life didn't matter, and one could say doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, even today. And
Right.
therefore, and Al McFarlane and Inside News, the Black Press of America, a critical role and a duty to be the voice of the voiceless, as you described it, and to talk about our interest in our people. Listen, Tyrone, as always, a good conversation, man. Thank you for your insight and your vision, your stories, your experiences, and the knowledge you bring to this. People can reach you by reaching out to the St. Paul with Leadership Council.
African American Leadership Council.
Okay, in St. Paul.
Yes.
Brother, thank you so much.
All right, brother. Thank you always.
We'll
Look
see
forward
you.
to the next time.
Okay, take care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care.